Have you ever wondered who the I is that thinks your thoughts? Or where the voice inside your head comes from? The one that comments on everything you do? And what if, and this might sound insane at first, the you who is trying to find the truth is actually the biggest obstacle to accessing it?
Krishnamurti once said, "When the observer realizes he is the observed, understanding is born." This idea, subtle yet transformative, invites a radical break from the way we perceive ourselves. And we're not just talking about a mental trick or a pretty quote to post on some spiritual social media page. We're talking about a shift in perspective that can turn your entire existence upside down, and maybe for the first time, set it right side up. All of us at some point carry the burden of suffocating self-awareness, that feeling of being judged, not by others, but by ourselves. You act, and then suddenly the voice kicks in. Was that right? Wrong? Appropriate? This inner narrator is like a sports commentator describing a game he made up himself. And what's most remarkable is that despite all this inner chatter, we keep believing that's who we are. But what if that voice is just background noise? What if the real you is the one listening, silent, attentive, always present, but never opinionated? What would happen if you stopped trying to silence that voice and instead began observing the one who's listening? This video is a journey, not to a new place, but to a deep recognition. What you're searching for is what you are. The consciousness trying to understand the world is the same one that brings the world into being. And upon realizing this, maybe, just maybe, something silent will awaken, something that's always been there. Let's go together to the center of this mystery. And who knows, maybe by the end, you won't need answers anymore, because the questions will have dissolved. Most people who begin an inner journey make a fundamental and understandable mistake. When they close their eyes and try to observe themselves, they believe that the inner voice narrating everything is the observer itself, but it's not. This confusion is so common that even experienced meditation practitioners can spend years trapped by it. It's like trying to quiet a room full of people by shouting for silence. The mind mimics itself so well that it ends up fooling even itself. This error has a name and a shape: the inner commentator. It manifests in three main forms: the narrator, the critic, and the cheerleader. It's the voice that tells you you're doing well, or terribly, during meditation. It narrates your day like a movie, blames you when something goes wrong, and praises you when you get things right. But above all, it's the voice that's always trying to define you. And the curious thing is, it feels separate from your everyday life, like a serene entity hovering above your experiences. But that's just another performance. It's the ego dressed up as wisdom. Picture yourself in a coffee shop. Background chatter, clinking cups, someone laughing loudly at a table across the room. Now imagine that instead of focusing on your own coffee, you only pay attention to the voices around you. That's the inner commentator. Background noise you've mistaken for your true self. It seems like an observer, but it's only an echo. It doesn't truly see, it reacts. The real observer, on the other hand, is silent. It doesn't think. It doesn't judge. It doesn't say, this is good or this is bad. It simply is. It watches the inner commentator in action, notices its comings and goings, but doesn't interfere. Not because it's indifferent, but because it understands that none of those voices define you. As Krishnamurti wrote, the observer is the observed. And when that perception takes place, separation ceases. The commentator is a product of the mind, and therefore a product of your history. It feeds on your insecurities, desires, traumas, and memories. It's conditioned, shaped by your childhood, your culture, and the fears and dreams you don't even remember the origins of, and that's why it's so unstable. One day, it calls you a failure. The next, a genius. Always swinging, always unsteady. That's why it's so hard to realize that this voice is not you, because it sounds intimate. It knows your most secret pains. But intimacy is not identity, and just because something sounds familiar doesn't mean it's true. The revelation happens when, for the first time, you experience that strange silence between one thought and the next, when in the middle of a breath, everything stops for a second. In that moment, brief, maybe even imperceptible, you're not thinking, but you are aware. You're not commenting. You're just there, present. That is the observer, the one who witnesses the inner storm without getting wet, the one who sees fear without hiding, who sees love without clinging, who sees sadness without trying to push it away. It's in that space that true transformation occurs. Because once you realize the commentator is not you, you stop fighting it. And the most curious thing? When you stop fighting, it quiets down too. And in the silence, you find yourself. The most common mistake, then, is to seek the observer as something separate, as a refuge. But it's not a place. It's the very space where everything unfolds. And once recognized, nothing else needs to be done. As Alan Watts said, you don't have to try to be yourself. You already are. If that sounds liberating, it's because it is. But it's also just the beginning. There's something deeply unsettling when you start to realize that the most essential part of you has no voice. It has no opinion. It makes no judgments. It simply observes. The true observer doesn't need to convince, correct, or justify. It doesn't interfere, doesn't try to control. It's simply present, like the sky that holds all the clouds without ever becoming one of them. This observer is silence, but not an empty or lifeless silence. It's a vivid silence, full of presence. It's there when you feel anger, when you laugh at a joke, when you fall in love or feel fear. It's there right now as you listen to these words. But it's not the one thinking about what's being said. It's the one witnessing the thought reacting. This is where many people give up, because the mind, always anxious for definition and control, wants to understand this observer. It wants to label it, name it, fit it into some theory you can share over Sunday lunch. But the observer doesn't fit into words. Not because it's too complex, but because it's too simple. It's so close, so fundamental, that the mind just slips trying to grasp it. Maybe that's why so many spiritual masters contradict each other when trying to describe it. For some, it's God. For others, it's the void. Some say it's the soul. Others say it's pure consciousness. Krishnamurti said it is the state of choiceless awareness itself. The Upanishads call it atman, the eternal self, the silent witness to all experience. Buddhists speak of rigpa, the naked presence beyond time. For Stoics like Marcus Aurelius, the secret lay in watching your own thoughts as if you were someone else, from the outside, with calm and clarity. In every tradition, the observer shows up under a different name, but the experience is the same, a state of consciousness that sees everything without getting caught up in anything. And here lies the beauty of it. When you realize the observer is silent, you discover that silence is not the absence of life, but its essence, the noise, the thoughts, the emotions. All of that comes and goes. But the silence that notices these movements remains. It's not something you create. It's something you recognize. Remember that moment when you were completely absorbed watching the ocean, or staring into a fire, or listening to music that made you forget yourself for a few seconds. That state of silent enchantment was the observer revealing itself, not as something separate, but as you, without the layers. And that's why it's universal. The observer watching your thoughts right now is the same one who witnessed the thoughts of Buddha, of a Tibetan monk, of a child playing alone, or of someone lost in daydreams on the Tokyo subway. The experience that passes is unique, but the space that observes is the same. This silent awareness is like a mirror. It reflects everything without being tainted by anything. And the more familiar you become with this silence, the more you realize that everything you thought you were, your name, your story, your desires, your fears, are just temporary forms passing across the unmoving backdrop of your presence. The mind screams, the observer listens, the mind analyzes, the observer simply sees, the mind wants to solve, the observer simply is. You don't need to make an effort to be this observer. You already are. What's needed is to recognize the moments when you get lost in the commentator and gently return to the silence that watches. And maybe in that process you'll realize that what you've always been searching for, peace, freedom, meaning, was never out there. It was in the space between one thought and the next, in the silence between two words, in the gap between you and the world. The question is no longer, how do I find the observer? The question becomes, why do I keep forgetting it? There is a strange, almost unnameable experience that all of us have had, yet we rarely notice it. It's that feeling that, despite everything that has changed in you over the years, your body, your tastes, your ideas, your certainties, something has remained the same. The gaze behind your eyes, the silent presence that has witnessed everything from childhood to now. What is it that never ages within us? This is where we begin to touch the timeless aspect of the observer. Think about it. When you were 5 years old and looked at the world, there was a sense of I am. Today, decades later, that sense of existence remains, untouched. You may have changed radically, but something within you has stayed the same. That something doesn't belong to time. It doesn't move with the seasons of life. It observes the changes, but it doesn't change with them. Krishnamurti used to say that the observer is the observed, because when you realize there is no separation between the one who sees and what is seen, you transcend duality. There is no longer subject and object. There is only consciousness witnessing itself in multiple forms. And at that point, every idea of identity dissolves. This consciousness has no name, no age, no past, and no future. It is the space where time occurs, yet it is unaffected by it. Philosopher Alan Watts compared it to a jazz performance. There is no central conductor, only a living, flowing improvisation with no fixed direction, yet perfectly coherent. The observer is that silence beneath the music. This idea is so powerful that it transcends cultures and eras. In the Upanishads, sacred Hindu texts, it is written, "The inner self is unmoving, yet it moves all things. It is far away, yet very near. It is within all, and yet outside all." The Christian tradition speaks of the kingdom of God within you. Zen Buddhism points to the original face before your parents were born. All of these teachings offer an invitation to recognize the eternal amidst the ephemeral. But why does this matter? Because recognizing this timeless aspect within you radically changes how you relate to pain, to attachment, to the fear of death. When you realize that your essence is not bound by time, you understand that what dies in you, your stories, your roles, your masks, was never truly you. It was content, not the container. Most of our anguish is born from the attempt to preserve what is impermanent. We cling to memories, to people, to ideas about ourselves, like someone trying to hold water in their hands. But everything slips through, and suffering comes from the effort to control the uncontrollable. The observer, on the other hand, doesn't try to hold on to anything. It simply sees, lets things pass, and remains. That is true freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom not to be swept away by what you are not. The writer Eckhart Tolle, echoing this realization, said, "You are not the voice in your head. You are the one who hears it." And here comes something even more radical. The observer is not yours. It is not private property, not a spiritual identity you acquire. It is the same in everyone. What changes is the content that flows, thoughts, emotions, experiences, but the space that perceives it all is one. That's why, when you recognize the observer, something in you relaxes, the barriers fall, the separation between you and the other starts to seem like an illusion. The same silence that observes within you is the one observing in another. The same unchanging backdrop behind your eyes is behind everyone's eyes. It's what mystics call universal consciousness. You don't need to believe in this. It's not a matter of faith. It's a matter of seeing, of sitting in silence and watching until separation dissolves, until time stops, until all that remains is presence. As a Zen master once said, before enlightenment, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers. During enlightenment, mountains are not mountains and rivers are not rivers. After enlightenment, mountains are once again mountains and rivers are once again rivers. When you see through the eyes of the observer, everything stays the same, but nothing is as it was before. We've arrived at the point where everything converges. What would it be like to live from that silent place? Not as a spiritual concept, not as a beautiful idea for moments of crisis, but as a living practice. What if, instead of trying to change the content of your mind, you simply recognize the space that allows everything to exist? Living from the observer means breaking the addiction to reaction. It's when something happens, a criticism, a compliment, a painful memory, and you're not immediately pulled into the emotional current, not because you've become cold or indifferent, but because something in you has learned not to mistake itself for what arises. It's like sitting by the edge of a river, watching leaves float by. Some are beautiful, others dirty, some frightening, others nostalgic. But you don't throw yourself into the river to grab any of them. You just watch, and by seeing clearly, you act wisely. The observer isn't passive. It's a conscious presence that allows action free from the ego. This freedom is real. It happens the moment you realize you no longer need to defend yourself from yourself. How many times have you felt trapped by obsessive thoughts, by emotions that seemed bigger than you? What if, instead of fighting them, you just looked, without judgment, without haste, without trying to fix it? That's the space where transformation happens, not because you tried to change, but because you stopped identifying. And here's the most beautiful part. The more you live from the observer, the more compassionate you become, because you begin to see that others are also trapped in their own inner commentators. They're also reacting to old stories, trying to protect fragile identities. And when you realize that, a deep understanding arises, a kind of tenderness for human suffering. It's not a feeling of superiority, but of kinship. The anger of the other becomes understandable. Their pain moves through you, because what observes in them is the same thing that observes in you. As Rumi wrote, "Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there." This presence starts to change everything. You truly listen. You begin to respond instead of react. You feel life more vividly, the light hitting the wall, the smell of coffee, the sound of an unexpected laugh. Living from the observer is rediscovering simplicity. It's finding peace without needing to escape. It's being whole, even when everything is falling apart. And the beauty of it is that it doesn't require you to become someone new. You don't have to abandon your life, your responsibilities, or your personality. What changes is not what you live, but where you live from. Before you were the actor trapped in the role. Now you are the stage that holds the entire play. As Zen wisdom puts it, sit, observe, do nothing. The world reveals itself on its own. Living from the observer means living without losing yourself. It's remembering, moment by moment, that you are the space, not the content, the awareness, not the thought, the sky, not the clouds. And from that place, everything becomes lighter. Not because the problems disappear, but because you stop carrying them in your mind. They come, they exist, and they go. And you remain. You've always been there. You always will be. Throughout this video, we've walked a silent path, perhaps the most silent of all, the path of turning inward, but not toward the conditioned self filled with stories and memories, rather toward the one who observes everything without ever being touched, the one who is here, right now, as you breathe, as you think, as you feel, and who has been here all along. The truth is, you don't need to reinvent yourself. You just need to remember. And this isn't a process of effort. It's one of surrender, like a leaf that stops resisting the wind and simply dances. The observer is the dance and the silence between the steps. He doesn't seek to be found. He only needs to be noticed. Now I want to offer you something that's not for everyone, but it is for you, because you've made it this far, searching for deeper answers about who you are and where your life is heading. I've created something that goes beyond a book. I built a map for the soul, a manual that blends science, philosophy, and critical thinking to help you break mental patterns, question your identity, and rebuild yourself from the roots up. This isn't just an e-book filled with pretty quotes. It's a guide for those who can no longer bear to live on autopilot. If something inside you is calling for change, growth, clarity, then this is your moment. Click the pinned comment and access the Manual of Self-Transformation now. Don't read it out of curiosity. Read it because your life depends on it. And if you decide to begin this journey, you will not be the same at the end of the path. The journey doesn't end here. In fact, it hasn't even begun, because the starting point is the destination. You won't find the observer in some enlightened future or in achieving spiritual perfection. He's here, now in this very moment where you allow yourself to simply be. And if there's any lingering question, let it be this. Who, within me, is the one who's doubting? Now before we close, I want to open my heart for a moment. A few years ago, on an ordinary morning, I was sitting on the edge of my bed, my mind spinning, fears, decisions, a tangled mess of mental voices that just wouldn't stop. And then, completely out of nowhere, everything went quiet. For a brief moment, something in me simply looked at the chaos and did nothing. It didn't judge, didn't try to fix anything. It just saw. And in that second, I realized, I am not all this noise that comes and goes. That was the beginning of an irreversible shift. Since then, silence has been my greatest teacher, and that's what I'm sharing with you here. Not a theory, but a lived experience. If you've made it this far, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Thank you for making room within yourself to question, reflect, and maybe, just maybe, recognize yourself a little more. Now, before the algorithm pulls us away from this presence, subscribe to the channel. Yes, I know, it doesn't quite match the tone of deep contemplation, but even silent seekers need a strategic click. Leave a comment with the moment that stirred you the most. Who knows? Your quiet insight might inspire someone lost in the noise. Like this video, the button's right there, waiting, like a good observer. And check out the videos appearing on your screen now. One of them speaks to something you don't even know you need yet. The other, well, it's almost like looking in the mirror and seeing something new. You're not alone. You never were. See you in the silence.